Captain Lee Jimin stood at the front window of her spaceship and stared at the huge alien structure floating in the black space ahead of them. The thing was massive, bigger than anything humans had ever built. It looked like a giant metal city that someone had thrown into the void between stars. Strange lights moved across its dark surface, like glowing worms crawling on metal skin. Jimin had been preparing for this moment her entire life. She was born in Seoul, when Earth was still recovering from the Great Wars. Her parents died when she was young, and she grew up in military schools learning to fight and lead. The Korean Space Force chose her to command this mission because she was smart, tough, and never gave up no matter how bad things got. The ship Rising Dawn carried 50 crew members on humanity's first journey to deep space. They had traveled for 2 years using new fusion engines that the Korean scientists built. Everyone on Earth was watching and waiting to hear what they would find out here among the stars. Jimin felt the weight of her people's hopes pressing down on her shoulders. Dr. Park Min-ho sat at his computer station trying to understand the alien writing that covered the strange structure. He was the smartest language expert on Earth and had spent years learning how to talk to aliens if they ever met any. His hands shook slightly as he worked because he knew this was the most important job anyone had ever given him. Engineer Kim Sora checked their weapon systems for the 10th time that day. She was young but brilliant at fixing and building things. The Korean military trained her to work on spaceships and fight in zero gravity. She had short black hair and scars on her hands from working with dangerous machines. Sora did not trust aliens and wanted to be ready for trouble. The alien station was beautiful in a scary way. It was made from some kind of dark metal that seemed to eat light instead of reflecting it. Huge towers stuck out in all directions, covered with symbols that glowed different colors. Some parts of it looked very old, while others seemed brand new, as if the aliens were still building onto it. As their ship got closer, Jimin could see that the station was even bigger than they first thought. It was the size of a small moon. Thousands of smaller alien ships moved around it like insects around a hive. Some of the ships were strange shapes that hurt to look at. Others looked almost normal, except they were much bigger than any human ship. The communications officer, Lieutenant Cho Sang-woo, suddenly sat up straight at his station. Strange sounds were coming through the radio speakers. It was not music or random noise, but something that sounded almost like speech. The sounds were deep and rumbling like rocks falling down a mountain. Min-ho ran to the communications station and started working on his translation computer. The alien sounds were unlike any language humans had ever heard. They were too deep and slow for human throats to make. But his computer found patterns in the sounds and slowly began to make sense of them. The first message was simple but terrifying. The aliens were telling the human ship to dock with their station. They said they had been watching Earth for many years and now wanted to meet humans face to face. They also said that humans should not be afraid because they meant no harm yet. That word "yet" made everyone on the ship feel cold inside. Jimin made the decision to follow the alien instructions. Earth needed to know what was out here in space, and running away would not help anyone. She ordered Sora to dock their ship with the alien station, even though every instinct told her this was dangerous. The docking process was smooth, which surprised the crew. The aliens had built a special port that fit human ships perfectly. This meant they had been studying Earth technology for a long time. They knew exactly how human spaceships worked and had prepared for this meeting. When the airlock opened, the crew got their first look at real aliens. What they saw made several people step backward in fear. The aliens were huge, standing almost 10 feet tall. Their skin looked like gray stone armor, and their eyes glowed red in the darkness. They had 4 arms, each one thick enough to crush a human easily. The lead alien spoke through some kind of machine that changed its deep, rumbling voice into words humans could understand. It said its name was Vorthak, and its people were called the Kronar. They had been the strongest warriors in the galaxy for thousands of years. Vorthak explained that many alien species existed among the stars. Most of them belonged to something called the Galactic Federation. This was like a big club for space civilizations, but not everyone could join. Species had to prove they were strong enough and smart enough to deserve membership. The test was simple. One human would fight one Kronar warrior in hand-to-hand combat. If the human won, then humanity could join the Federation. If the human lost, then the Kronar would destroy Earth to prevent humans from becoming a threat to other species. Jimin felt her blood turn to ice. The Kronar warrior they would have to fight was even bigger than Vorthak. His name was Gorthek, and he had never lost a battle. His arms were covered in scars, and his hands looked strong enough to bend metal. He carried weapons that could cut through steel like paper. The worst part was that Vorthak was clearly sizing up the human crew like a farmer looking at cattle. His glowing red eyes moved from person to person, studying their size and strength. When his gaze stopped on Jimin, she could see what he was thinking. She was small compared to his warriors. She looked weak and fragile. Other alien species watched from balconies high above them. Jimin realized this was not just about humanity anymore. This was entertainment for creatures who had probably watched dozens of species fail this same test. The aliens were betting on how quickly the humans would die. But something strange happened when Vorthak stared at Jimin. Instead of showing fear or backing down, she smiled. It was not a happy smile, but the kind of smile a wolf shows before it attacks. She had learned that smile during the wars on Earth, when enemy soldiers thought Korean fighters would be easy to defeat. The beast was measuring her up, thinking she would be simple prey. All the aliens were making the same mistake that humans' enemies had made for thousands of years. They saw a small person and assumed weakness. They did not understand that humans had survived by being smart, not strong. Jimin stepped forward and looked up at the massive alien warrior. Her voice was calm and steady when she spoke. "Do you want my weak side or strong?" she asked quietly. The question confused Vorthak because he did not understand what she meant. But Jimin knew exactly what she was doing. She was about to show the galaxy why humans had conquered their own planet. The Kronar warriors made deep, laughing sounds that echoed through the metal halls of their station. To them, Jimin looked like a tiny insect trying to threaten a mountain. Vorthak and his warriors found her words amusing because no creature that small had ever challenged their strength before. They led the human crew through long corridors filled with strange alien technology. The walls were covered with weapons that looked like they could destroy entire cities. Glowing screens showed star maps of the galaxy with thousands of worlds marked in different colors. Red marks meant dead civilizations that had failed the Kronar test. The arena they entered was enormous. It could have held 100,000 spectators, and today it was almost full. Aliens of dozens of different species sat in the viewing areas. Some looked like giant insects with multiple eyes. Others were tall and thin like living shadows. A few species were so strange that looking at them made the humans feel dizzy. All of these aliens had come to watch another species fail the test. This was entertainment for them. They placed bets on how quickly the human would die. Most aliens gave Jimin less than 1 minute before Gorthek would crush her completely. Gorthek stood in the center of the arena, and the sight of him made several crew members gasp in fear. He was even larger than he had appeared in the corridor. His muscles were bigger than tree trunks, and his skin looked like it was made from living rock. Scars covered his arms and chest from thousands of battles he had won. To demonstrate his power, Gorthek picked up a thick metal bar and crushed it into powder with his bare hands. The sound was like thunder rolling across mountains. He threw the powder into the air, and it fell like silver snow around his massive feet. The watching aliens cheered and made excited sounds in their various languages. But while everyone was watching this display of strength, Jimin was doing something different. She was studying the arena like a scientist examining a laboratory. She noticed that the floor was made of smooth metal with good traction. The gravity was heavier than Earth normal, but not impossible to work with. There were no weapons provided, which meant this would be purely hand-to-hand combat. Most importantly, she watched how Gorthek moved. He was incredibly strong, and his armor looked almost impossible to damage. But he moved like a tank, slow and predictable. Every step he took was heavy and committed. Once he started moving in one direction, it would be hard for him to change course. Quickly, Dr. Park Min-ho came close to Ji-min before the fight began. He had been analyzing the alien languages and behavior patterns while they walked through the station. "Captain," he whispered quietly, "I think they expect us to fight like them. Strength against strength. They have no concept of using speed or intelligence in battle." Engineer Kim So-ra had been studying Gorthek's armor and weapons. She pointed out weak spots where the armor plates joined together. "Their technology is amazing," she said, "but it's designed for fighting other strong, slow opponents. They probably never fought anyone who moves fast and thinks during combat." Ji-min nodded and began removing her heavy spacesuit. Underneath, she wore lightweight combat gear that would let her move freely. The watching aliens laughed even louder when they saw this. They thought she was making herself weaker by taking off protection. They did not understand that sometimes less armor meant more options. As she prepared for battle, Ji-min thought about human history. Humans were never the strongest species on Earth. Lions were stronger, bears were tougher, elephants were bigger. But humans had become the dominant species anyway. They won through intelligence adaptation and the ability to use tools and strategy. She remembered stories her grandmother told her about the old wars on Earth. Korean fighters had often faced larger armies with better equipment. But they won by fighting smart instead of fighting hard. They used the terrain. They used surprise. They used their enemy's strength against them. The arena had many features that most fighters would ignore. There were metal barriers and raised platforms. There were walls that could be used for cover or leverage. Gorthek saw these as obstacles to avoid. Ji-min saw them as weapons she could use. She also noticed something interesting about the other aliens watching the fight. They all sat forward in their seats, expecting a quick, brutal finish. None of them looked bored or distracted. This meant they had never seen a fight that lasted very long. They were used to contests decided by pure strength in the first few exchanges. Vorthak raised one of his 4 arms to signal the beginning of combat. The arena fell silent, except for the sound of hundreds of alien creatures breathing in anticipation. Some of them had traveled across the galaxy just to watch this moment. Ji-min stood in fighting stance, but it was not like any combat position the aliens had seen before. Most warriors stood firm and solid, ready to meet force with force. She stood, light on her feet, ready to move in any direction. Her arms were relaxed, not tense. Her breathing was slow and controlled. Gorthek looked confused by her stance. In all his battles, opponents had faced him directly, trying to match his power with their own. This small creature was acting like she planned to run away instead of fight. The idea that running could be part of fighting was completely foreign to him. The watching crowd grew excited as they waited for the massacre to begin. They expected to see the human crushed in seconds. What they were about to witness instead would change their understanding of what combat could be. Ji-min smiled one more time before the battle started. She had spent her whole life preparing for impossible fights. Korean military training had taught her that the best way to beat a stronger enemy was to make them beat themselves. She was about to show the galaxy a completely new way to win. The beast had measured her up and found her weak. Soon he would learn the difference between being weak and being smart. In the silence before Vorthak's signal, Ji-min whispered something that only her crew could hear, time to show them what humans can do when they stop playing by other people's rules. Vorthak's arm dropped, and the battle began with Gorthek charging forward like a living avalanche. His strategy was simple and had worked for centuries. Use overwhelming force to crush the enemy before they could think or react. Every step he took shook the metal floor of the arena. The watching aliens leaned forward, expecting to see the human disappear under the Kronar warrior's massive fists. Some of them had already started celebrating humanity's failure. They had seen this scene dozens of times before with different species. It always ended the same way. But Jimin did something that shocked everyone in the arena. Instead of trying to block or meet Gorthek's charge, she simply stepped aside at the last possible moment. The huge warrior thundered past her like a freight train missing its target. He crashed into the metal barrier behind where she had been standing. The impact was tremendous. Gorthek hit the wall with enough force to dent the thick metal plates. But because of his size and momentum, he could not stop quickly. For a few precious seconds, he was off balance and vulnerable. Jimin used those seconds to strike at the joints in his armor where Sora had spotted weaknesses. Her attacks were not meant to cause serious damage. Instead, they were designed to confuse and irritate her opponent. She hit nerve points and pressure spots that made Gorthek's movements less coordinated. Each strike was precisely placed to have maximum effect with minimum effort. The watching aliens grew quiet as they realized something strange was happening. This was not the quick, brutal fight they expected. The human was still alive and moving. Even more confusing, she seemed to be in control of what was happening in the arena. Gorthek spun around looking for his tiny opponent. His red eyes glowed with anger and confusion. In all his battles, enemies had either charged at him or tried to defend against his attacks. None had ever simply avoided fighting him directly. He did not understand what the human was trying to accomplish. Jimin kept moving in patterns that made no sense to the Kronar warrior. She would dart in close enough to hit him, then disappear before he could respond. Sometimes she used the arena obstacles to block his vision. Other times she would roll under his swinging arms and strike from unexpected angles. Every time Gorthek thought he had her cornered, she would slip away like water. His heavy armor that was meant to protect him from powerful blows actually worked against him now. It made him slow and clumsy when fighting an opponent who moved like a dancer. The frustration was clear on Gorthek's scarred face. He began swinging, wildly trying to hit anything instead of aiming carefully. This was exactly what Jimin wanted. An angry opponent makes mistakes, and mistakes could be exploited by someone smart enough to see them. She began talking to him while they fought, which confused the Kronar warrior even more. "Is this how your people always fight?" she asked, while dodging another massive fist. "No planning, no strategy, just trying to smash everything." Her voice was calm, like she was having a normal conversation instead of fighting for her life. The questions bothered Gorthek more than her physical attacks. His warrior training had taught him to ignore pain and injury, but no one had taught him how to ignore an opponent who treated fighting like a puzzle to be solved instead of a contest of strength. Dr. Park Min-ho and engineer Kim So-ra watched from the sidelines, analyzing both the fight and the alien reactions. They realized this combat was revealing something important about the galactic community. These species had become predictable in their thinking. They all fought the same way and expected others to do the same. Meanwhile, Jimin had identified her opponent's greatest weakness. Gorthek's massive size and heavy armor made him incredibly powerful, but they also made him overheat quickly. She could see moisture forming under his armor plates. His breathing was becoming heavier and less controlled. While she was tired from the higher gravity and constant movement, she was in much better condition for a long fight. Her smaller size and efficient movements meant she was using much less energy than her opponent. This was becoming a battle of endurance rather than strength. The tide began to shift when Jimin made a bold decision. Instead of just avoiding Gorthek's attacks, she started deliberately triggering them at strategic moments. She would position herself near walls or barriers, then dodge at the last second, causing the warrior to crash into solid surfaces. Each impact weakened Gorthek while requiring no energy from her. She was using his own strength and momentum as weapons against him. The watching aliens had never seen anything like this before. They began making excited sounds in their various languages. Some of the alien observers started betting on the human, instead of the Kronar warrior. The odds were still heavily against her, but a few clever aliens recognized that something unprecedented was happening in the arena below them. Gortek was now breathing hard and moving more slowly. His attacks were becoming easier to predict and avoid. The confident warrior who had entered the arena was being replaced by a confused, frustrated opponent who could not understand why his proven tactics were failing. Jimin sensed the change in her opponent and pressed her advantage. She began striking at the same weak points, repeatedly causing cumulative damage. Like water wearing away stone, her persistent attacks were slowly breaking down Gortek's defenses. The arena fell silent, except for the sound of heavy breathing and metal striking metal. What had started as expected, entertainment was becoming something much more significant. The aliens were witnessing a fundamental challenge to their understanding of combat and power. For the first time in the fight, Gortek showed something other than anger in his glowing eyes. There was uncertainty, and perhaps even a hint of respect. This tiny creature had lasted far longer than any opponent he had ever faced. More importantly, she was winning. As the fight continued, something unexpected began happening to Gortek. The massive Kronar warrior was not just getting tired from the physical battle. His mind was becoming confused and frustrated in ways he had never experienced before. His training had prepared him to fight enemies who would meet his strength with their own strength, but Jimin fought like nothing he had ever encountered. She moved like smoke and struck like lightning, then disappeared before he could retaliate. Every time he thought he understood her pattern, she would change tactics completely. It was like fighting an opponent who could read his thoughts and counter them before he acted. The human captain continued talking during combat, which made Gortek's confusion worse. "Your people have been warriors for thousands of years," she said, while slipping past another wild swing. "But you only know one way to fight. What happens when that way does not work anymore?" Her words were not meant to be cruel, but they highlighted something the watching aliens were beginning to understand. These ancient warrior species had become locked into thinking patterns that had worked for millennia. They had stopped adapting and growing because their old methods always succeeded. Dr. Park Min-ho watched from the sidelines with growing excitement. His linguistic training helped him understand the alien conversations happening in the viewing areas. The observers were not just entertained anymore. They were confused, and some were frightened by what they were seeing. Many of these species had been part of the Galactic Federation for thousands of years. They had developed their technologies and fighting techniques to near perfection. But perfection could become a trap if it made you unable to handle completely new situations. Engineer Kim So-ra was analyzing the technical aspects of the fight. She noticed that Gortek's armor and weapons were masterfully designed for fighting other large, strong opponents. But they were actually disadvantages against someone like Jimin, who used speed and intelligence instead of brute force. This revealed something important about galactic civilization. All these advanced species had been fighting each other for so long that they had developed similar approaches to problems. They had reached a technological and tactical plateau where everyone knew what to expect from everyone else. Meanwhile, Jimin had identified the critical moment in her battle. Gortek was overheating badly now, and his movements were becoming sluggish. More importantly, his confidence was shattered. For the first time in his life, he was facing an opponent he could not understand or predict. She decided to take a calculated risk. Instead of continuing her hit-and-run tactics, she positioned herself directly in front of the exhausted warrior. This confused him because it looked like she was finally going to fight him properly. He gathered his remaining strength for what he thought would be the final exchange. Gortek charged forward with everything he had left, putting all his power into one devastating attack. But at the last second, Jimin dropped low and swept his legs. The massive warrior was moving too fast and was too tired to adjust. He crashed to the arena floor with a sound like thunder. The impact stunned Gorthek, and for a moment he lay still, on the metal ground. Jimin could have attacked him while he was down, but instead she stepped back and waited. This act of mercy confused the watching aliens even more. In their experience, combat ended with the death or complete defeat of one fighter. As Gorthek slowly got back to his feet, something had changed in his glowing red eyes. The anger and frustration were still there, but now they were mixed with something else. Respect. He was beginning to understand that this small human possessed a type of strength he had never encountered before. The watching crowd began murmuring, among themselves in dozens of alien languages. The human crew could not understand the words, but the tone was clear. The aliens were impressed and perhaps a little frightened. They had never seen one of their champions struggle like this against such a small opponent. Some of the alien species in the viewing areas began having heated discussions among themselves. Dr. Park Min-ho caught fragments of their conversations through his translation equipment. They were not just talking about the fight anymore, they were questioning their own methods and assumptions. Vorthak watched the battle with growing interest. As the leader of the Kronar, he had seen thousands of combats over his long lifetime. He had never witnessed anything like what was happening in his arena. This human was teaching them all lessons they had not known they needed to learn. Jimin sensed that the fight was reaching its climax. Gorthek was nearly exhausted, but he was also adapting to her tactics. He was learning to predict some of her movements, and his attacks were becoming more accurate. If she let the battle continue much longer, he might find a way to counter her. Advantages. But she had one more strategy she had not used yet. Throughout the fight, she had been studying not just Gorthek, but the arena itself. She had noticed that certain sections of the floor were slightly raised, creating elevation differences that could be used tactically. She began leading Gorthek toward one of these areas, making him chase her up a slight slope. The additional effort, required to move uphill while wearing heavy armor, drained his remaining energy reserves. By the time he realized what she was doing, it was too late. Standing on the higher ground, Jimin had both a tactical advantage and a symbolic one. She looked down at the massive warrior who had seemed so intimidating when the fight began. Now he was gasping for breath and struggling to stay on his feet. "Do you yield?" she asked quietly. The question echoed through the silent arena. No one had ever asked a Kronar warrior to surrender before. In their culture, combat ended in victory or death. But Jimin was offering a third option that none of them had considered. Gorthek looked up at her with eyes that held no more anger, only exhaustion, and grudging admiration. For the first time in his long career as a warrior, he found himself facing a choice he had never imagined having to make. Gorthek stood swaying on his feet like a great tree in a storm. His massive chest rose and fell as he struggled to catch his breath. The proud warrior who had entered the arena confident of easy victory now faced a decision that challenged everything. He believed about combat and honor. The arena had fallen completely silent. Thousands of alien observers held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Many of them had never witnessed a Kronar warrior in such a position. Some species had traveled across the galaxy specifically to watch this test, and none of them expected to see their champion offering mercy to a defeated opponent. After what felt like an eternity, Gorthek slowly lowered his head in a gesture that the watching aliens recognized as surrender. The sound that erupted from the crowd was unlike anything the humans had ever heard. Some aliens cheered while others made sounds of disbelief. A few species seemed angry that their entertainment had ended in such an unexpected way. Vorthak descended into the arena, moving with the deliberate pace of someone making an important decision. His forearms hung at his sides, and his glowing red eyes showed an expression the humans could not read. The crew of the Rising Dawn held their breath, unsure if they had passed the test or doomed their species to destruction. But instead of making an immediate judgment, Vorthak did something that surprised everyone present. He knelt beside his fallen warrior and then looked up at Jimin with what seemed like genuine curiosity rather than anger or disappointment. "How did you know to fight this way?" he asked in his deep, rumbling voice. "Our warriors train for centuries to perfect their combat skills. They study every fighting technique known to our species and many others. Yet you defeated our greatest champion using methods we have never seen before." Jimin helped Gorthek to his feet, showing respect for her defeated opponent, even though the battle was over. "On Earth, humans are not the strongest or fastest or toughest creatures," she explained. "We survived and became the dominant species by learning to adapt, to think differently, to use our environment and our intelligence as tools." She gestured toward her crew, who stood watching with pride and amazement. "Every challenge we faced as a species taught us new ways to overcome obstacles we could not simply overpower. We learned that there is always more than one solution to any problem. The key is being willing to look for alternatives instead of just trying harder with methods that are not working." Vorthak listened intently to her words. His ancient eyes held the weight of thousands of years of experience, but also something else that had been missing for a long time. "Wonder. When did your species learn these techniques?" he asked. Jimin smiled and shook her head. "We did not learn them from anyone. We developed them ourselves through necessity. When you are small and weak compared to your enemies, you either find smarter ways to fight or you die. We chose to be smarter." Dr. Park Min-ho stepped forward with his translation equipment, still recording the alien conversations happening throughout the arena. "Captain," he said quietly, "I think this test was not just about our combat ability. These aliens have been looking for something specific, and I believe they found it in your fighting style." The linguistic expert had been analyzing the alien discussions and had made an important discovery. Most of these species fight the same way they always have, he continued. Their technology is advanced, but their thinking has become fixed in patterns that worked for them thousands of years ago. Engineer Kim So-ra added her own observations. "Look at their equipment, their architecture, their weapons. Everything is built for strength and durability, but not for adaptation or innovation. They have reached a point where they need fresh perspectives to continue growing as civilizations." Vorthak confirmed their suspicions with his next statement. "The Galactic Federation has existed for over 10,000 of your years. In that time, we have achieved great things, but we have also become predictable. Our methods, our solutions, our approaches to challenges have become rigid patterns that we follow without question." The massive alien leader looked around at the watching crowd of different species. "We have been hoping to find a civilization that could bring new ways of thinking to old problems. Most species that come before us demonstrate their strength, their technology, their military might. They follow the same patterns we have seen countless times before. But today, we witnessed something entirely different," he continued. "The human defeated our champion not through superior force, but through superior thinking. She showed us that there are ways of approaching problems that we had never considered." The crowd of alien observers began making excited sounds as they realized the implications of what their leader was saying. This was not just about humans passing a test. This was about the entire galactic community discovering that they had been thinking too narrowly about solutions and possibilities. Jimin began to understand that this encounter was much more significant than she had realized. "We were not really being tested for membership, were we?" she asked. "You were testing whether we think differently enough to help your civilization grow in new directions." "Exactly," Vorthak replied, and for the first time his intimidating voice carried warmth instead of threat. "The Federation has been stagnant for centuries. We have incredible technology and vast resources, but we solve problems the same way we always have. We need species that can show us alternatives." Dr. Park Min-ho was practically vibrating with excitement as he realized the full scope of what was happening. "This is not about joining their club," he whispered to his captain. "They want us to be advisors. Consultants problem solvers for challenges they cannot handle with their traditional methods. The massive Kronar leader nodded approvingly. Your species will not merely be granted membership in the Galactic Federation. You will be invited to serve as strategic advisors and innovative thinkers. Your ability to approach challenges from unexpected angles is exactly what our alliance needs. As the implications sank in, Jimin felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Humanity was not just being accepted into galactic civilization. They were being asked to help reshape it. The small species from Earth was being invited to teach ancient civilizations how to think in new ways. The beast had measured her up expecting weakness. Instead, he had discovered that humanity's greatest strength was not physical power, but mental flexibility. In a galaxy full of species that had perfected their methods thousands of years ago, that flexibility might be the most valuable resource of all. 3 days had passed since the fight in the arena, and the human crew was still trying to understand how completely their situation had changed. They had been given luxurious quarters on the alien station and were treated as honored guests instead of test subjects. Dozens of different alien species wanted to meet them and learn about human ways of thinking. Jimin stood in what the Kronar called the Council Chamber, a massive room where representatives from across the galaxy gathered to discuss important matters. The walls were covered with star maps, showing thousands of worlds and trade routes that connected civilizations spanning millions of light years. Vorthak had explained that the Galactic Federation faced challenges that their traditional methods could not solve. Some problems had existed for centuries without resolution because every species approached them the same way. They needed fresh perspectives and new ideas that could only come from minds that thought differently. The first challenge they presented to the humans was a dispute between two ancient civilizations called the Zelkari and the Thuron. These species had been fighting over mining rights to certain asteroids for over 300 years. Both sides had valid legal claims, and neither would compromise. Traditional Federation mediation had failed repeatedly. Dr. Park Min-ho studied the case files with growing interest. Both species were incredibly advanced and had developed complex legal systems over thousands of years. But they were so focused on proving they were right that they had forgotten to look for solutions that would benefit everyone involved. Engineer Kim So-ra examined the technical data about the disputed asteroids. The mining sites contained rare minerals that both civilizations needed for their technology. The Zelkari and Thuron had divided the resources based on ancient territorial agreements that no longer made practical sense. After 2 days of research, Jimin proposed a solution that shocked the Federation mediators. Instead of fighting over who owned the mining rights, why not create a joint operation that would be more efficient than either species could manage alone? The combined expertise and resources would increase production while reducing costs for both civilizations. The idea was so simple that the alien mediators were embarrassed they had never considered it. They had been so focused on determining legal ownership that they never asked whether shared ownership might work better. The Zelkari and Thuron agreed to try the human suggestion, and within weeks, their centuries-old conflict was resolved. Word of this success spread quickly through Federation space. Other species began requesting human consultation on problems they had been unable to solve. Each case revealed the same pattern. Advanced civilizations had become trapped in rigid thinking that prevented them from seeing obvious alternatives. Species called the Morphic had been struggling with overpopulation on their homeworld for generations. Their solution had always been to build taller cities and find ways to fit more people into the same space. Jimin suggested they consider colonizing other worlds in their system instead of cramming everyone onto one planet. The Korthian Empire had spent decades trying to perfect their military technology to defend against space pirates. So-Ra proposed that instead of building better weapons, they should focus on making their trade routes unpredictable and their cargo ships faster. Pirates could not attack what they could not catch or predict. Each successful consultation proved the same point. Human thinking was not superior to alien thinking, but it was different. Humans approached problems without the assumptions and limitations that came from thousands of years of cultural tradition. They could see solutions that were invisible to minds trapped in established patterns. But the most important discovery came when the Federation asked for help with their greatest challenge. Several member species were becoming isolated and stagnant. Their civilizations had reached technological peaks and then stopped growing. They were slowly dying from lack of innovation and new ideas. Minho realized that this was exactly what had happened to many human civilizations throughout history. Ancient empires became powerful and comfortable, then gradually lost their ability to adapt to changing circumstances. The solution was not new technology, but new ways of thinking about old problems. The humans proposed creating exchange programs where young members of different species would live and work together on mixed crews. Instead of keeping their civilizations separate, they should encourage cross-cultural contact and idea sharing. New perspectives would come naturally from exposure to different ways of thinking. This suggestion terrified some of the older alien leaders who worried about losing their cultural identity. But younger members of various species embraced the idea enthusiastically. Within months, mixed crews were exploring new star systems and making discoveries that no single species had achieved alone. Vorthak found Jimin in the observation deck, looking out at the stars through the massive windows. The view showed dozens of alien ships coming and going as the exchange programs brought different species together in ways that had never happened before. "Your species has given us something we did not know we needed," he said in his deep, rumbling voice. "We thought we were testing your worthiness to join our alliance. Instead, you have shown us that our alliance needed to change in order to remain worthy of the galaxy we live in." Jimin smiled as she watched a mixed cruise ship depart for unexplored regions of space. The crew included humans, Kronar, Zelkari, and 3 other species working together as equals. It was exactly the kind of cooperation that could solve problems no single civilization could handle alone. "We never wanted to change your civilization," she replied. "We just wanted to be part of it. But sometimes, being part of something means helping it become better than it was before." 6 months later, the human crew of the Rising Dawn prepared to return to Earth with news that would change everything. Humanity was not just joining galactic civilization as junior members. They were being invited to help guide its future development as partners and advisors. The beast had measured her up and found her weak. But weakness and strength were just different ways of looking at the same qualities. What the aliens saw as human weakness, intelligence over strength, cooperation over competition, adaptation over tradition, turned out to be exactly what the galaxy needed to continue growing and thriving. As their ship departed the Kronar station, Jimin looked back at the massive structure that had seemed so threatening when they first arrived. Now it looked like a bridge connecting humanity to infinite possibilities among the stars. The small species from Earth had found their place in the universe not by being the strongest or most advanced, but by being the most willing to think differently. In a galaxy that had forgotten how to change humans, would be the teachers who reminded everyone else that the best solutions often came from asking the most dangerous question of all. What if we tried something completely different?